From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good evening. I'm Anne McLean from the Library's Music Division. I'm delighted to be hosting the entire St. Lawrence String Quartet, Jeff Nuttall and Mark Feuer, violins, Leslie Robertson, viola, and Christopher Costanza, cello. And also pianist Peja Muzejevic for our pre-concert talk tonight. Welcome. This evening opens a 3-concert residency project for the St. Lawrence here at the library. And for each of those concerts, they will be playing our Stradivarius instruments. So that's really exciting for us. And if we heard the rehearsal this afternoon, and it sounds sumptuous. It's a wonderful way for us to share in celebrating the quartet's 25th anniversary. I think serendipitously, in a way, your programs here this season happen to illuminate quite a few important facets of your career. Your strong involvement with new music and your relationships with composers like John Adams and Osvaldo Goldhoff, an abiding curiosity and interest in unusual repertoire, for Peja as well, your love of Haydn, and definitely something I know you are truly passionate about, your keen desire to connect with audiences. We'll come back to all this in a moment, but first a softball question. So how about those Strads?
Not bad at all. Well, as we were discussing, I mean, the cello is absolutely magnificent. I mean, it is really one of the great cellos, I think, probably in the world. It's in magnificent condition, first of all. I mean, just to look at it, it's really something. But it has this gigantic, sort of bassy sound. There's a richness to the upper register as well, and the middle register maybe even most impressively, because sometimes that's the register of a cello that gets swallowed up a little bit. But with this particular instrument, I find there's a great, not just projection, but sort of interesting multi-layered quality to that sound, and it's just an absolute treat to be able to play it. And I'm so excited to be coming back twice more to play it.
The truth be told, Chris sounds really good on his crappy cello as well.
My cello's not crappy.
I mean, there's a certain amount of truth to that.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
a great player like Chris can sound, you hand him anything, he sounds really good. So I think a lot of the joy of these instruments is the ability, what it allows the players to do as much as how it sounds to you all. That's an interesting question, topic of conversation. But I think the cello sounds great, but I think it's almost, well, that would be a test, wouldn't it? Which has been happened a lot. Give him a total piece of junk Chinese-made cello, and he would sound great. It might not be as fun for him.
Maybe not.
Now that you've had a little while to get used to them, is there anything you're doing differently? Anything that you consciously are adjusting?
I mean, I think a lot of the adjustments are things that happen even subconsciously. I mean, we find yourself drawing the bow slightly differently, or leaning into the string differently, or even vibrating differently. Because you, if you have to do an A-B, you have one instrument, it may be a really good instrument, but you have to work to some degree to get a certain kind of sound out of it. And you go to another instrument, like this particular Strad cello, and you don't have to do that kind of work to get that sound out of it. Suddenly it frees you up to focus on other things, and maybe just explore new colors, which is a fascinating thing. And to truly have that experience, and I'm sure you guys could comment on this as well. 2-3 days with an instrument is it takes years to really get to know an instrument. But the learning curve is pretty sharp at first. We discover a lot of things immediately.
It's not entirely dissimilar to, when you're on the road a lot, even if you're using your own instrument, every hall is different, every space is different. So you kind of have an inborn sense after so many years of being on the road that whatever space you're in, you have to, from within, have the inner game shift and change. So the biggest difference for me here has been just the relationship, the external relationship being something I have to change and shift as well. But I also find that this space that we're going to playing this evening is so live and so fantastic for these instruments. It's almost like going to one of the great violin stores. I don't know if you find this, Jeff, but if you can't find a really great violin store that doesn't have a really great resonant space in it, because they want you to buy, right? So if you go in and try a Stradivarius anywhere, they're never going to have a bad space to play it in because they don't want it to sound bad. Here, the space is so fantastic. We're in a position where once we get over that little learning curve of the externals, then the internal world kicks in again, and it's a joy to play in this space. I have to tell you, I think it's, for us at least, a really great experience.
Great. Back to the theme of anniversaries. This is a shared interest for you and for us because you're at 25 and we're coming up on 90 in January.
You look great.
We're going to be officially opening an 18-month celebration of our 90th anniversary with your concert in January. So, and we have a major celebration with so far 8 and maybe 9 commissions. We're really excited about that. And the one for you, in January, the St. Lawrence will be premiering, the East Coast premiere, I should say, of a new work written for them by John Adams. The library is a co-commissioner of this work along with Stanford Live, Carnegie, Juilliard, and Wigmore Hall. So we're pretty excited. And let's talk for a moment, now that we've mentioned Stanford, let's talk about what seems like a remarkably supportive and warm environment for you out there. And when did you start your residency there?
We started there in 1998, and we moved there in '99. And it's been great. We love it there. Nice, a nice family of colleagues, great and interested students, great community. A lot of people who play on an amateur involvement, they might not play on an amateur level. Actually, many of them are stunningly gifted and accomplished, but choose to do other things professionally. And it's been a really rich experience for us to be there.
The weather's nice, too.
Oh, you direct the Chamber Music Seminar there, don't you, Leslie?
We have a summer program. We have an emerging artists program, emerging string quartet program. We also have a program with the gifted youth, which takes place in the summer, and a couple other things that we are involved in.
And if you players out there, you come and hang out at Stanford for 10 days. It's a great mix of the concept that, you know, music's, everybody's in the blender together. So you have young quartets, you have old amateurs, you have young amateurs who just graduated from Stanford and are working at Google or whatever, and we're all in this together making music and learning and rehearsing. So if you play, come and hang out.
You talked about, I think, Chris, on your blog, you said something about working with ridiculously intelligent and talented students. And,
Ridiculous in the most positive way
imaginable. Exactly. I was wondering just how in the world you managed to design a job with so much scope for creativity. You have an amazing range of things you do there.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you want to speak to
I was just going to say the beauty of it is that there was no job description in many ways. There was a basic one, but it was more of a situation of what can you do to make yourself relevant to our community or make yourself indispensable from our perspective.
So we do what you would consider sort of normal quartet and residence activities, meaning we teach private students, we organize and administer a chamber music program for students. We coach some of those groups. We perform on campus formally 3 times a year at Stanford Live, and then informally various other places. But then that we've been able to expand, and I think it's ever sort of growing, and it's continually flexible into other programs. Meaning we sometimes will do joint presentations at other schools and departments on campus. We've done programs at the med school and law school and business school and various others. We're working at one point, maybe we should revive it, something with the athletic department. We met with some rowing team people. Because we thought, well, rhythm and rowing and rhythm and music. And so we keep trying to come up with I mean, when I say trying to, we don't want to force it. We just want to come up with ideas that seem sort of naturally interesting. And we have such supportive colleagues on campus that you know, we don't come up against very many roadblocks when we want to get something to happen. So you know, we can continually look for these things, and we'll continue to find them.
I think we should stress too that, like, one of the coolest things about teaching and working at Stanford is that they're, well, very rarely anybody gets out of there and wants to become a professional musician. So the idea of teaching people who are going to go out into the world and hopefully take a love of music and continue to play, but it's a totally different animal when you're training someone at a conservatory. And you look at, you get somebody to performance degree, even from the great schools in the country, Curtis, Juilliard, the chances of actually earning a living doing what you really want to do are very slim. So it's a whole different animal, and it's a joy to teach people who are going to be audience members and amateur players rather than trying to get that second-tier orchestra job at the back of the seconds and struggle the rest of their lives. So it's a real, and not that a lot of the kids are very gifted, but they have no preconceived notions about, I'm going to make a living doing this. I'm going to be a doctor or an engineer, and I work at Facebook, and I'm going to play string quartets for fun in my spare time, which is very cool.
There is still a vetting process, though. I mean, we don't take just anybody who walks in the door. We will have them audition, and they have to be at a certain level for them to be able to come into the music school and for us to teach them. So there's still a level there. But yeah, I think that the idea that they're coming in with a love of the art that is not necessarily their primary focus, but they see very well that they gain a great benefit from it as a part of their lives. That's really a great thing.
Yeah.
And you have really major composers out there, too, very significant ones. I've been following some of your Music in the Brain symposia things that you do. We had a similar symposium here. And two of the people that are on your faculty are people that we've been associated with recently in our Technophile series. One is Mark Applebaum, who came here last year to give a lecture with Go Wong and did this amazing performance. I've forgotten the name of the piece, but it's a performance piece he does seated himself.
Oh, that's called aphasia.
Aphasia, that's it. It was incredible. So this was a part of a double-header lecture. He spoke, and also Go Wong spoke about the technology. And then this year, we are going to be presenting a professor that you have worked with, who has written a work for you, a new one, Jonathan Berger. In fact, you've had several pieces from him, and we wanted, and Pedja, this is very much involving you, because this piece one of the pieces that I was looking into was Theotokia, and we'd like to try and play it. We have a clip, which I apologize has an old picture of you. I hope it will play, but anyway, for a moment, I will just say while we're queuing this up, if you want to try it, that Jonathan Berger is going to be giving a lecture here December 10th called The Aesthetics of Data, which is pretty wonky kind of a title, but rather fascinating. And yes, that's the piece. Wonderful. Yeah, we'll play just an excerpt.
From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Tell us about this work. It's kind of fascinating.
Well, that was Pedja Muzievich at the
Pedja,
piano.
you want to say a couple things?
Hello, everybody. So, let me talk now. Yeah, this is a piece that we premiered at Spoleto with Don Upshaw and 5 of us, and then it had another life as a staged opera with more players. And what I find interesting about Jonathan, who lives a lot in the computer world, that he, to me, is weirdly, which you would not expect at one of the more humane composers, that actually he can write a tune, which is an odd combination of somebody who lives with computers and then he writes a tune, and you think, that's kind of cool. So I've enjoyed. I've played another piece for the reopening of Dock Street Theater. But I just want to back up, as I've been sort of a lucky witness occasionally to their Stanford Live, including the seminar. First time I came to the seminar, I said that the collective IQ of the fellows was higher than our national debt. So it's an incredible combination of forces there. But what I have to commend them is that they have truly enabled the whole generations of music lovers, which is really goes to their passion for music and their commitment in the community. And that's exactly what Leslie said, is that they've really created this situation for themselves in a most creative way, rather than just saying, okay, it's this many hours and we're going to do this and that. It's always thinking, what else can we do and how else can we be integrated? And of course, the response has been amazing. So every time I've been there to play, all of these people come to concerts. You know, that 30 to 50 middle six-figure income that we all search for, they're all there in the concert hall where these guys play. So it's pretty remarkable in that sense.
And so now this is part of a larger piece. Is it Visitations? Is the name?
Yeah, there are
of
two operas that we
operas.
premiered at Bing. Yeah.
We should mention we just premiered his new string quartet called
Last
Swallow last Sunday. So
Wonderful.
our first show at the Bing Concert Hall on state on campus. Yeah, he's worth. Go check Jonathan out. He's really interesting, brilliant, passionate guy. He's great.
We're looking forward to bringing him. The title of that lecture, The Aesthetics of Data, is kind of daunting, but when you look at the description online, I think you'll find it very fascinating. I hope
This
you
is
might.
just a short breakfast meeting at Stanford, of course.
Yeah.
This is what they do
Right,
there.
right. So one of the things that you do at an anniversary is to look back at your organization, your goals, your missions, your ideals, your accomplishments, and evaluating what you started with and what you have now. We're enjoying doing that right now. We're getting ready for our anniversary, looking back at some of the things that were done here in the 1920s. It's kind of fascinating because they include not only the things that you would expect, remarkable string quartets, including the Flauncelli Quartet, the Curtis Quartet, William Kroll, I mean, major names, of course, people like that, Harold Bauer, the pianist, and von der Landowska, and on we could talk, but we find that they also did early music, which was very unusual in those days. Mrs. Coolidge promoted early music in a very serious way, and some jazz even. One of the earlier concerts included some jazz at the Nathaniel Shilkret Orchestra performing music of W.C. Handy. That was very unusual, really cool. So for the library, our goals are involved maintaining a strong commitment to free programming, to diverse programming, artistry of the highest caliber, and the importance of supporting new commissions. For the St. Lawrence, what are you thinking about these days as you look at your anniversary?
Party,
Yeah.
big party,
A
cake
year
and martinis and
String quartet is not rocket science. You know, it's what we were doing 25 years ago. We're doing today. You know, you try to play great music as well as you can in spaces that are cool and with people who like to listen to music. I mean, it hasn't changed at all. We get paid a little more. Our manager's here, thanks to David Rowe. But really, the thing is, this, I mean, I don't feel a whole lot different. The fact that, the remarkable thing is that we've actually be able to have like a life, buy a house and have a family and play string quartets, because when you start out, you're never sure that's, but it's not like, it hasn't changed in the way the Library of Congress has changed. It's sort of the same. Hopefully we're better. I mean, that's the other thing about music, which is so cool. You know, 25 years is young for a string quartet. So the idea is that you keep trying to get better. And you're always, and you can, as a, you know, a tennis player, you're done at 34. As a string player, you're in your prime in your 40s and 50s. So that's part of the joy in getting better. But the actual act, you can't make it better. I mean, you take a space like that, you take really great music and an audience that likes to listen, and there's nothing else you can do. You can't make it better. I mean, you can make it different. So it's not rocket science in terms of, the celebration is just like an excuse, A, to have some new pieces, which is sort of cool, like John writing a new piece, Jonathan, and B, to have a few more parties, like Chris said. But the actual events themselves are what we were doing 25 years ago. We just sound better, hopefully.
I think you sound great. And we have a perspective on you because we were looking back at some of the earlier programs, and we were noticing you've always had, of course, this interest in unusual repertoire, which is great. A lot of pieces that don't get played so often, and you played, for example, in 1998, the beautiful Chausson Sextet with Miriam Fried and James Tocco, which is rarely heard for some reason. That's a gorgeous piece. But you still, that's what one of the hallmarks of your career is that you find these fabulous works and bring them out or reintroduce them. And that brings us to the Amy Beach piece that we're going to be hearing tonight. You really helped to bring that piece back in a very serious way, didn't you?
Who found that? You find that, Pedro?
I think I did.
think
yeah.
you did. We played it with Pedro many years ago. I can't remember how many years ago, and we loved it. It was such a great experience. We were excited to have another opportunity to.
Remember,
to
we heard
explore.
it. We were coaching it in a master class one time. They
Oh,
some
that
students.
was it,
In Arizona, I think.
And I remember
But
we
I
all looked at
played it
each other
before,
and
yeah.
thought,
Yeah, you had played it over.
yeah, but you played it.
Yeah, I was actually asked to learn for a concert in New York with another quartet that will remain nameless, of course. No, actually a great quartet. And I liked it. I really, really enjoyed it. And I hope you will too. Amy Beach was a very skillful composer, lived the latter half of 19th century and died in 1944. And very much in romantic tradition, a little Wagner, a little Franck, little this, little that. Very, very inspired, I feel. Really lots of beautiful moments. And so it's been fun to play.
It's funny, there's, often when you find a piece that no one's ever heard of or has never played, it's terrible, because there's a reason it's never. But every once in a while, you discover things like the Tweel Piano Quintet as well.
right.
There are things you discover that it's mysterious why, and there's certain aspects of the repertoire, like that whole late French Romantic, like Chausson.
Right. Well, the
You know,
quartet
the
even more than the
piano
concerto.
quartet and the piano trio
Yeah.
are both tremendous. You never hear those. So
What-
there's certain
yeah.
sort of, still, we're lucky to this day, parts of the repertoire that have not been unearthed. And then there are parts of the repertoire that should be earthed.
No, but what I find fascinating is how the sort of double standards that we all have. So we dig out Amy Beach, and I'm very tempted to stop myself to say that there are many, many parts of the piece that are really inspired, and then there are some that are not. But I can say that for 99% of the music, there are, a handful of true masterpieces. And then, there's a lot of music that we love. The parts where you check out a little bit, and, we could live without these 8 bars. But when we have somebody who's not Schubert, then we are sort of ever so more ready to say, well, this, is kind of silly.
Sure,
but we just the right we accept.
And that sort of brings up the
Favorite.
Well, no, we won't go there. But the act, when you're working, for instance, we're working with Jonathan Berger, and you find moments like that this doesn't feel right. It doesn't really work, these 8 bars. Now, of course, Miss Beach is long gone, so you can't sort of cut.
Well, we
those 8
tried
bars.
to reach her, but there's no reception in the hall.
But there are moments when you're creating a new work, but the composer says, this doesn't really work, what can we do? And he says, no, I like it, or you're right, or I'll do this, and I'll take this. So Berger, there were 5 to 10 moments where he cut measures or added something, and it was an amazing, so that, that's why you wish you could go back in time. I'm sure Mrs. Beach would say, oh yeah, you're right, that's an extra, just get rid of that bar.
Sure. Yeah.
But we don't have the right to do that because she's not with us.
We don't.
Well, it's really a powerfully, the word you always hear about in this piece is rhapsodic. Every single description, every program note always says rhapsodic. But it is, you'll find, it's a very beautiful piece. And I was interested in looking to see what we had about Mrs. Beach. We have one of her manuscripts here. And we actually have a number of letters that she wrote to Mrs. Coolidge. And interestingly, she was just 3 years younger than Mrs. Coolidge. Mrs. Coolidge was born in 1864, and Mrs. Beach was born in 1867. And they both had some similar career trajectories, or perhaps lack of a career trajectory for Mrs. Coolidge before she really got rolling in her career as an impresario, because both were ladies from relatively well-to-do backgrounds, and women were not expected or really allowed to have professional performing careers. So Mrs. Beach taught herself. All the things you read about her in the biographies say that she literally taught herself. And she was not really allowed, is a harsh word, but they didn't want her to have a teacher. Mrs. Coolidge, on the other hand, had excellent musical education all the way through, was a fine pianist, and the two women shared a lot of acquaintances in the music world and so forth. For example, according to the biography, they may have met at the 1893 Columbian World Exposition, because Mrs. Coolidge was playing the Schumann Concerto there with Theodore Thomas, which is nothing to sneeze at, but unfortunately it was her only public performance of that stature, or that, it was considered to be a charity performance. But anyway, back quickly to Mrs. Beach, I looked up some letters, and I found one where she thanks her for inviting her to the first festival in the Berkshires and says what a remarkable experience. She thanks her profusely. And she writes to her also sending a manuscript of some music. She said, I'm sending you my variations to you with many thanks for your for being able to do this. She said, it's seldom that I've cared so much for anything of mine as for this composition, and I cannot help hoping that it may appeal sufficiently to you to lead you to suggest it for a festival performance in Pittsfield. And then she says it's short, and she goes on to kind of, promote short is good and so forth. But anyway, so there are these moments here that the two ladies coincide in time. And I wanted to just thank you for bringing this out. David, my colleague, was saying that it was performed as recently as 1944, I believe you said, at the Phillips Collection, or in the 40s. Yeah, here in Washington. But then it went into a long limbo. And you...
Yeah, and
really
what I find actually interesting about this piece, this is a time when many composers, if one is to look for sort of a general problem in this time, is the length. People sometimes went on, and when you say rhapsodically, I would immediately think, oh, it's the catchphrase, it goes on. It's a very concise piece. And that's what's kind of remarkable, because at that time, that was often when you go to this late romantic music, you're like, oh, and here we are, it's 47 minutes, it's 53 minutes. This is actually incredibly, I mean, she's really edited herself in a way that's really disciplined, kind of remarkably for the language, which is incredibly lush and beautiful harmonies and gorgeous melody. The second one, that she could have lingered and she could have, she could have gone on. She's very actually efficient in that sense, which is rare.
And it's tied together, so this Franck's cyclic form. I mean, she copied, which I think is great. People disagree, but I love it when that tremendous first movement tune comes back in both subsequent movements and really sums up the whole piece. It's an amazing moment.
So you guys really share a lot of passions, and I wanted to sort of wrap up or move towards wrapping up as we're getting to the question time by talking with you about something that I know is really very much front and center for all of you, and that is your extremely fervent desire to work, to engage with audiences, connect with audiences. You have a number of remarkable ways that you go about that. So let's talk about your passion for communication and connection.
Well, I mean, fundamentally, that's what a performance is all about. And I think it's important to remind ourselves of that, but I think all performing groups should remind themselves of that. We should remind our students of it. It's one thing to play really, really well and be studious and get to know the music and even be very musical in your playing of the piece. It's another thing to be able to take that accomplishment of learning something well and communicate it to an audience of people. And sometimes it's hard to put your finger on exactly what one does to make that happen. Some people kind of have it in spades as a natural ability to communicate. Other people are very introverted and even uncomfortable trying to step outside that comfort zone being, by yourself, playing really well. So I think it's essential that we, always remind ourselves that that's important, or at least realize that we're doing it or not. And what is that thing? Well, I think it's, believing in what we're doing, trusting, having confidence, going out on a limb sometimes, more sort of objectively, the idea of literally talking to audiences, having a conversation to sometimes a large degree, sometimes a small degree, but being able to connect with the audience verbally, to have a style of playing that I think is perhaps physically interesting. That's a little bit less important, but so that at least the audience understands that we're really working to communicate what it is that we feel to them, as opposed to being sort of closed up and playing really well. I mean, again, we can think of groups, I won't name any, or people who play really well, but who aren't so good at that act of connecting to audiences. And I think that also speaks to the need for there to be different types of performances. I mean, there are some performances that are more formal than others. It's important to have less formal opportunities to play, where you can do a lot of that connection, the extra musical connection, which I think we all did this when we were just starting to perform. Oh, go do school concerts, do kiddie concerts. It's essential that we kiddie concerts. But it's not only to connect with children, it's to connect with all audiences. And I think that's what can be very exciting about chamber music too, that it's easy for a small group of people to unify that connection. I think in some ways larger ensembles have a hard time of it unless you have a conductor like Michael Tilson Thomas in San Francisco, for example, who will frequently just walk out on stage and start talking spontaneously to the audience.
I saw Norman Lebrecht's comment about you, that you're the quartet that speaks on his, but not just speaks. It's amazing. If you watch their Haydn Discovery videos, it's kind of, I want to ask how you became so coordinated as a dramatic troupe, because it's incredible. Jeff will speak and talk about Haydn, whom he says is the best, first, and only. I think that's your comment about him, and it's a fascinating video on their website. But the comments, the stream of comments on Norman Lebrecht's slip disc site went on and on and on about your abilities. And Mark, I know you are a person of vast interest. I'm aware of your early music work, and also you're a jazz player. Since you've joined the quartet, how do you feel that you've fed into this and jumped in the middle?
Well, I've often said that this is the only string quartet in work today that works like a great jazz ensemble. There's a depth of listening that the St. Lawrence have. That's the immediate attraction, I think, to me as a performer, but also to the listener. There's a real depth in between the four of us, and so that is something that you can only build on if it's there. You know, it's the comfort in the silence. You know, and then once you're really comfortable in that silence, and I'm looking down there, I'm seeing the Excelso String Quartet sitting right there. They're on their way to be incredibly comfortable in their own silence too. We were working with them at Stanford not long ago. When you're really comfortable in that silence, then the very nature and the communicative power of the gesture that you're committing to becomes amplified. You know, that's really the heart of it. I think the really great jazz players and the really great improvisational Baroque players that I've worked with over the years, they share that same ear. You know, there's never any need for one person to say, this is the only way it can be, and you're going to have to follow me. There's actually an inverse relationship in the listener's ear when you're in that performance space where you're really committed to the moment, where everybody's committed to whatever's going to happen, and then you do it. And then sometimes, you know, when you do that, sometimes you might have a little bit of egg on your face when it's all over. But that's totally fine, and that's part of the experience. And I think that's one of the ways in which communicatively this group is much more effective as a string quartet than just about anybody else. That we commit to that moment, come what may. So if Jeff falls off his chair by chance,
we'll all fall off our chairs.
We'll all fall off the Strad.
Don't
listen, David.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen.
Not tonight.
He hasn't done it in at least 10 or 12 days.
He hasn't done it in a long time. But you know,
It's not the only one you have, right?
Luckily, we have a few spares.
A few extras over there. Isn't it? Oh gosh. Well, sort of continuing on from there, I wanted to ask you to react to a couple of things about trends now in presenting and so forth. I was reading an interesting blog earlier this month from a conductor named Baldur Brunnigan, who's associated with the BBC Symphony and the Britten Sinfonia and a number of, you might have heard of them, a new music conductor, plays or conducts Klangformbean and a number of really fine groups. And I was interested to read, he talks about the 10 things he thinks people need to address, and his blog has attracted more than 100,000 hits on this subject, which is, you know, one of these endless dialogues between various advocates. But he advises the idea of bringing cell phones into a concert hall. He says that people should be allowed silently to engage on their phone and tweet about it. He even thinks they should have the right to record what they see. I don't know about that, but I mean, that's a huge issue, copyright-wise. We don't have to get into that. But anyway, that's one of the things he talks about. And talks about, you know, clothing and allowing downloads of music from the artist before and afterwards. I got a kick out of Philip Kennicott's article mentioning in a recent article in the New Republic that the Cleveland orchestra musicians are now doing concerts at the Happy Dog Bar as a way to reach out in the community. So anyway, what for you is a balance? How do you balance these kinds of issues?
there you go, there's your cell phone.
Well, you know, sort of back to the point about simplicity. It's basic. Silence is crucial. Totally crucial. I mean, the genius of Haydn or any great composer is often, as Mark said, in the silence. So I love bars, but
not for the drinking.
I mean, just in general to hang out. But it often fails miserably as a venue for what we do, and it's super cool. And there's a trend in that. And I don't want to sound like a total old grumpy person, but it usually sounds terrible because there's no silent background, so that's bad. Natural reverb is really important. So like wooden box with quiet. That's why cell phones sort of suck, because they often make noise. And I know you don't want to be stodgy, and that's the whole balance between making people feel like they're part of the action, but also having this incredible, there's nothing great. I mean, that's why the opera is so cool. You go to the opera, and there are 3,500 people sitting dead silent, focused all together in that one incredible moment. And that is the magic of live performance, having everybody connecting at one moment. And again, there's no substitute for that. You can't make it cooler than that. So, I mean,
I think there's a balance where it's such a fine line. It's such a fine line between people wanting to feel like if they've paid money to come here you play, they have a right of certain kind of ownership. But also there's the hoarder side of it, which is people like to just collect everything. Yeah. And they want to collect everything they experience in their lives, come what may. So they'll have their cell phone out looking at their dog, doing its business in the morning. Oh, isn't that cute?
And they're
going to do the same thing coming to a string quartet concert.
Instagram.
It's this human habit that completely goes the wrong direction. So once you open up that door and you allow that energy into the concert space, the silence is gone. That opportunity of enjoying what potentially comes from the silence is over. And then I'm completely on Jeff's side with this. You can't possibly have an experience that.
But I just wonder if it's also that not silence in a sense of vacuum or submission to something, but silence as a dialogue. Silence as something that's active.
Like people listening actively.
Correct.
Is totally
So
different
it's
silence
not.
in an empty room.
Absolutely.
But I do think that then stodgy and stiff is something different, and that's where I think this gets lost in translation. It doesn't have to be stodgy, and if you want to clap after the first movement, please do. It's a 20th century invention.
Or after the cello solos.
Don't encourage Chris.
I didn't say that.
Totally true.
No, there's certain, and I think so that they're mixed. It's a mixed media. There are certain things that could relax, and then I agree 100% with Jeff that the first and foremost it has to sound good naturally, because the huge difference is something that often people forget is we work acoustically. And often when you bring especially younger people, they don't really understand the difference, because it's a fascinating thing to go to a big opera house and see one human person open their mouth and fill up a 4,000 seat auditorium. It's a freak show.
Until they actually experience it, they don't know.
Well, no, every so often somebody makes a mistake and some very famous person comes to the Met and Merry Widow to do a little song, and I say, I don't need amplification. You do. It's huge. So I think there is a lot of mixed media that some things, I mean, I've read that thing. I love verse 2. Do not tune on stage, please. And unless there's an emergency. You tune backstage. And there was clapping between the movements. If something ends like the first movement of the Tchaikovsky piano concerto, as Liberace always said, I wouldn't dress this way if I didn't want to be noticed. If you end that way, that calls for an applause. Beethoven, first movement of every Beethoven symphony. Please, I mean, man's been going 5-1, 5-1, and then it's vacuum silence. Why? I mean, we know historically that people clapped because people inserted aria between the movements, and of course they clapped. So that there's I think it's a mixed conversation.
Well,
but don't
exactly.
tweet.
That's why I wanted to hear your thoughts on this, because it is a mixed conversation and an ongoing one and so forth. And to step back to Phil Kennicott again just for one moment, he had a fascinating quick phrase about this, and he said, the orchestral concert experience is in fact countercultural. I like that. You're exactly what you're saying, Jeff, about this. And I think this is maybe a good time to move forward and have a chance to have people in the audience ask you a few questions. I know you need to get onto those strads, but okay, sir.
Could you comment on the Korngold, especially the programming with the early? Okay. Could you comment on the Korngold piece and especially the programming with the early Beethoven?
Yeah.
We saw the manuscript here at the library.
We saw the
Yeah,
Korngold
right.
manuscript along with some other Korngold manuscripts. It's amazing, just so exciting to see. Well, the Korngold has been a fascinating piece to us in the quartet for the last couple of years that we've been playing it. It's the first piece that he wrote after the conclusion of World War II, when he went back to writing music for the stage. He refused to do such a thing and wrote film scores throughout the entire war because the Nazis had banned his music in Europe, and it was a sort of protest. So it was a very meaningful piece for him. Now, we gravitated toward it because we just liked it a lot, and it sort of fits so well into our general sort of philosophical sense of looking for works that are neglected, that should be played. Now, how that necessarily ties to Beethoven, I probably couldn't tell you, and I don't think that it does. I mean, I think, the program just has a certain balance by having our early Beethoven quartet at the beginning, and then giving you this Amy Beach, which is, an unexpected gem, and then ending with another unexpected gem in the Korngold. And I think these unexpected gems are actually so beautiful and heartfelt and meaningful that I think we end up, hopefully, we'll see how it all works for you, we end up with a sort of balance. But I'm not sure we put our heads together and said that the Korngold and Beethoven necessarily complemented in any sort of deep way. I think it was just
It is an interesting through line, though, and a lot of what makes the string quartet such an incredible art form is this through line from Haydn and then Beethoven. So Opus 18 Beethoven is just Haydn. The form that Haydn set up is the same form that Korngold uses. So you have the juxtaposition. There's a scherzo, there's a slow movement, there's a rondo, there's a finale with a coda. There are a lot of similarities in terms of the structure. Of course, the musical language is totally different. But it's an interesting, to see that Korngold was choosing to write in basically a classical style in terms of the form, that sonata form, first movement. So a lot of similarities in terms of the form, and then it ends.
But I do think, while there may be not a conscious effort, it's a language we speak, and it's part of your sort of inner being. So when you think of programming and you think, how about that, and you sometimes very visceral reaction, well, that would not go. So there may not be conscious, but as you put together programs, you have this idea, oh, that would work for whatever reason. It's like, cooking pork with dried figs.
it's a lot like that.
I think the guys I think you guys picked the program. Library people, right? Davis?
There was back and forth, but I do think what Pedro just said is fundamentally what it is. It's just, oh yeah, these seem to go well together. I think we'd have fun playing these together. It's not about thematic programming in this particular case. Sometimes we end up doing that, but not all that often in our group.
I've got another question, Tom.
Yeah.
Thank you. Couple questions. Going back to the beach and that sort of period in American music, have you or are you exploring other repertory by American composers of that era, late 19th, early 20th century? This could be piano quintets, string quartets, piano music, or any of you delving further into that? And second question, I remember reading some about the various things you're doing at Stanford. What are you doing with the law school, for example?
Well,
protecting yourself.
Yeah, trying to get it. To address the first question, we did actually read through a few pieces by perhaps Arthur Foote and George Whitefield Chadwick, and I'm not sure we.
Stanford, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a whole era of that. There's a lot of that music that we. The question is, at what point do you think it's worthwhile to present in public? It's like really fun to read through, and the beach sort of raised itself above. Oh, we need to show people this. A lot of the other stuff is really fun to play, but halfway through you think, it might not be so fun to listen to, even if we do a great job. So it's always a balance that way. But there is a lot of really interesting and borderline great repertoire.
About 25 years ago, I explored a lot of cello piano repertoire by those same composers, and was scheming to do a recording, which I never got around to doing. But there's actually a lot of music by that collection of composers. McDowell comes to mind. And I mean, Arthur Foote, I mentioned Chadwick, they wrote a significant amount of stuff. The question is, like what Jeff says, I mean, hard to tell how much of it it really holds up. I mean, we probably should delve into it a little bit more. But then law school.
We've done several programs at the law school. The biggest one we did was several years ago, and it was in collaboration with 4 constitutional lawyers who three of them happened to be amateur musicians. We did a collaborative presentation where we spoke about original intent, and we looked at they looked at the U.S. Constitution as their ancient document, and we used Eine kleine Nachtmusik as the music original document. And it was things about interpretation, like how far can you, how many differences can you make or changes can you make to those documents before you violate the original meaning. Things like technological innovation, how does that change the interpretation of the document? And we would do demonstrations. That one was turned into a PBS program. But we've done other things. We did a presentation for a class that teaches negotiation and conflict resolution. They came and filmed one of our, the teacher came and filmed one of our rehearsals. And then they took a 3-minute section from a larger
That was
rehearsal.
embarrassing.
The art of negotiation was the class. That was really, it is true, String Quartet is sort of that. So it was an interesting, like, seeing your dirty laundry before a bunch of lawyers. It was interesting.
Right.
At least you were not paying $800 an hour.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. But, you know, Eine Kleine and the Constitution were penned in the same year, so that was the obvious tie-in there.
Anyone else have a question?
So returning to the Strads, how many exist now in the world? How many of these Stradivarius instruments exist? And it kind of surprises me that the Library of Congress has these instruments. I think of this institution as doing lots of things, but collecting instruments, for example, did not seem to me to be one of them before tonight.
I think they were forced upon the library. We should ask the experts, but
Yeah.
Well,
I think if somebody comes forward and says, I want to give you all a bunch of Strads, you don't really say no. And I think that's how it started, right? I mean, am I wrong there? And then it just sort of...
I can speak to
They were
is
gifted them.
Carol in the room?
Carol should...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, I can speak to how we got them. I can't answer the question of how many there are in the world. I think people say 600 violins. I know, I do know that they say there are 10 authenticated violas, and I can't resist saying that we're going to have the St. Lawrence playing the Mozart String Quintet to show off 2 of the violas, which we have right here. It's pretty unusual. And there are only a few cellos, I think
Not
50,
too many. Yeah, that sounds
about
about right.
50. So that's all I know about that. But the way the library acquired these instruments was the lady whose picture is on the wall just around the corner from the door there, Gertrude Clark Woodall, gave them to the library between 1935 and 1937. And she wanted to be a cultural philanthropist. She was very interested in music. She was not a musician. Her husband was a carpet manufacturer, and that's all we know about her. She had no children, she had a little family, and her life is very mysterious. But anyway, she watched Mrs. Coolidge's benefactions to the library, and this interested her. So she purchased them with the help of Louis Krasner, who was a violinist, a very well-known violinist and conductor of the time, and gave them to the library. So that's a short answer.
That was the first of several gifts which came afterwards.
Which came afterwards?
There were
was-
more
Well,
gifts
there have been
after
more
that.
gifts since
Yes,
Church's Bride. There were
yes.
wind
She gave the
instruments, for
initial
example.
number of them. Then later on in 1954, we acquired the Fritz Chrysler Guarneri, which is a treasure, and it's probably over there right now. We have the Brookings Amati, which is going to be refurbished a bit this fall, which is a stunning instrument. And we have the Tuscan Medici viola on loan to us from the Baird family, from the Tuscan Corporation. So we're very, very, very fortunate. And it takes artists, major artists like these, to make them do what they can do best, bring joy, really, in music making. Anybody else have a question? Are we going to? Okay. Well, we thank you so much for taking the time.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.